Welcome to The World This Week. I'm Gavin Lee here every Friday with 7 days of the biggest global events distilled into 45 minutes alongside a panel of distinguished international correspondents. In a week that started with President Trump threatening to wipe out the whole of civilization in Iran if the regime failed to respond to his ultimatum and agreed terms for a ceasefire, presidential decorum went out of the window with Trump unfiltered, effing and jeffing on Easter Sunday as he warned Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz, followed by surreal scenes on the White House lawn as he hammered home the message sandwiched between the First Lady and the Easter Bunny to an audience of families and children.
You don't mind when the enemy is weak, but that enemy is strong. Not so strong like they were about a month ago. I can tell you, in fact, right now, they're not too strong at all, in my opinion, but we're soon going to find out, aren't we?
It's been a week that ended with a 2-week ceasefire announcement, with both Tehran and Washington claiming to have the upper hand as Pakistan's government played host to the belligerents. Islamabad on lockdown this weekend with senior US and Iranian officials in town. The Strait of Hormuz, the choke point for a fifth of the world's oil, still hasn't opened completely or immediately, according to energy analysts, despite US demands. Tehran is talking of a toll fee of up to $2 million per ship, but the sole narrative from the US Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, was a winning one.
Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield. A capital V military victory.
It's been a week where attention quickly turned from Iran to Lebanon as Israeli forces carried out the most deadly attacks so far in its reignited war against Hezbollah, claiming exemption from the ceasefire. Operation Eternal Darkness, the IDF labelled it, with 50 fighter jets dropping 160 bombs on 100 areas in 10 minutes. Israeli official called it the heaviest blow to Hezbollah since the attacks on electronic devices 2 years ago, codenamed Operation Grim Reaper. Lebanese health officials claimed it was a brutal, indiscriminate massacre with civilian areas hit and at least 300 people killed. Channel 4 News picked up footage of a 13-year-old girl playing with a face filter on her phone as the strikes took place. As it became clear that Israeli actions in Lebanon could derail the US-Iran peace talks, it appeared that President Trump's pressure led to an announcement by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that there would be separate truce talks with the Lebanese government in the coming days about disarming Hezbollah.
We hope that, America could control its ally and this time honor their words, actually.
It's been a final week of campaigning in the Hungarian election, the closest fought campaign in 16 years, with polls suggesting it could be the end of the Orbán era, although not if the US can help it. Vice President J.D. Vance flew into Budapest to endorse Europe's longest-serving leader and claim without evidence that Brussels bureaucrats and Ukraine's intelligence service were interfering in the vote. The same claim came from the opposition leader, Peter Magyar, but aimed instead at the US, Russia too, and neighbouring Serbia, when news emerged the Serbian army had suddenly foiled an apparent bomb attack on a Russian gas pipeline to Hungary. Was Ukraine behind it? Viktor Orbán implied. Cheap theatre and fear-mongering to boost Orbán's chances at the polls, his critics said. He denied it was a so-called false flag operation.
I would not further damage Ukrainian-Hungarian relations by accusing any country, say Ukraine, without knowing the facts, so I would not do this until we have the facts. I will not do this. However, it is undoubtedly true that what we are experiencing here now fits into a series of events, since the Ukrainians have such an ability and are willing and able to do something like this.
And it's been a week for the history books, with the Artemis II crew officially taking another giant leap for mankind. They flew the furthest into space than any humans have before, just over 250,000 miles and back in 10 days. The plan, a stepping stone for future missions and a recce for a possible space base in the space race in the years to come. Well, it's time to meet the Earthlings on the panel tonight. Let's say hello. In the studio with me, we have Anne Bagger-Marie, independent journalist, consultant, former senior editor of the International Herald Tribune and New York Times Style magazine. Evening to you, Anne. It is great always to have you on board with us. Last time you were here, we talked about the Epstein files. It was dominating the world headlines back in February. This week, an announcement by Melania Trump stating rumours, reports linking her to Epstein are untrue. I note that you've said recently that you now only view President Trump through one filter. Is it good for him, his family and his friends? So with that said, how do you view the Melania statement this week?
Okay, there are a number of different ways you could look at what she said and why she chose to say it now. In terms of the timing, there is a book about to come out in the UK and the US about the Duke of York the former Duke. I believe he's still the former Duke of York.
He's still the former Duke of York, yes.
Okay, Prince Andrew. It's called Entitled. And in there, I've seen reports that an interview with Epstein is quoted in which Epstein claimed that he had sex with Melania in 2008, a year before she got together with Donald Trump. Now, it's possible that her statement today that she had nothing to do with him, she'd never been involved with him, she disavows any knowledge of his actions and against women, could have been to get ahead of that. Because if this is a bombshell revelation in the book, there's going to be reporting on it. But, there are a couple of other things we might consider. Why stand up and say this now with everything else going on? The reporting has been that her husband knew that she was going to make the statement, but he didn't know what was in it. So on the one hand, you could say maybe she's doing this to pull focus away from Iran, where clearly her husband is losing. But the other possibility is, and any of the women out there, maybe even some of the men, could understand how she might feel this way. She is probably just sick and tired of everything said about him, about his relations with women, about the way he's conducting the presidency. So when she stood up and said, not just, I was not an Epstein victim, but I want the Epstein victims to be heard in Congress. Let's hear their story. Let's believe their story. It's entirely possible she was saying, yeah, let's see what they say about my husband. Let's get up there and see what they say. So there are many possibilities for why she did what she did. One thing I will say this is that she pretty much nailed it. She did a very good job reading from the teleprompter. So she's been carefully coached. And so there's a team behind her. And let's find out, let's do some reporting on what the team told her, and let's make a book.
And some of the victims groups saying that they will seize this moment to try to hold her to her word and use it to actually further the case, get it back in the headlines. I want to also bring up something to you, plot twist of the week story. This is the US prolific thriller writer called Freda McFadden. She's behind The Housemaid, wants to know a secret Dear Debbie, although she's not Anne Freda McFadden. It turns out it's a pseudonym. She's actually called Dr. Sarah Cohen. She said she's sick and tired of keeping up appearances. She said this week, I'm tired of people debating if I'm a real person or I'm three men. I am a real person. I have a real identity. I don't have anything to hide. To which is the question, is there a pseudonym we need to know about you, Anne? Have you ever used a secret pen name?
No.
Would you ever tell me if you did?
Yeah, I would. But, with a surname like Bagamary, it's a good way to get noticed. There aren't many of us in the world.
Very good answer. It's a good pen name on its own. And great to have you with us. Let's cross to London. Let's meet our next guest. I'm delighted to welcome Belle True to the programme. Good evening, Belle. Belle is the Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent for The Independent, named Reporter of the Year, the UK Press Awards 2023, the winner of the Marie Colvin Award for Bravery and Excellence in Foreign Reporting. Welcome to The World This Week, Belle. I should say many watching or listening will have seen or read your work on the Middle East. More recently, fantastic work covering the ICE protests in the US. You've spent time reporting on Ukraine in the conflict. This week, President Zelensky saying that the US focus on events, quote, we have to recognise we are not the priority for today. I wonder what extent you think Ukraine is paying in terms of the price of its defence against Russia, weapons flow, the prospect of a peaceful outcome, given that US attention right now is elsewhere.
I mean, they've been paying an absolute, quite a huge amount, actually, to be honest. It's not even just about the fact that the US has been distracted, but it's also about the fact that there's been sanctions lifted on Russia because of the oil crisis from the situation that's taking place in the Strait of Hormuz. That's directly impacted Ukraine. Ukraine has been asked also to withhold some of its strikes on Russian energy areas. So, for Ukraine, this has been an absolute disaster. Meanwhile, the world has been focused on peace in Iran. The president's been distracted. Very little pressure is being put on Russia. And so, for Zelensky, this has been a disaster.
You gave a fantastic TED talk on our profession a couple of years ago. War journalism should be rooted in empathy, it was called. You talked about the collapse of discourse. And with it, one social media example you gave, videos of the last moments on the battlefield of Ukraine, edited so it's set to comedy music. People liked it, people gave thumbs up, people laughed, laughing emojis, etc. And now I'm interested in your thoughts. We're seeing the gamification of war, aren't we? Not just from influencers, trolls, but the US Defence Secretary too, putting out images, gamifying what's going on. And it becomes kind of harder to tell, doesn't it, what we should be following and how we should frame it.
Yeah, but it's very hard for us journalists here because we're seeing so many AI-generated images, some of them scarily accurate, that people say are, actually what's happening on the ground. At the same time, there's also some which are clearly just for comedy, but it's definitely making the situation on the ground more complicated. People don't know what's real, what's not. This is coming at a time where the so-called mainstream media is facing a lot of criticism. People don't trust us as much as they did in the past. And so, when you've actually got some of the most powerful people on the planet sharing generated images, it makes it very difficult to be able to tell what's real and what's not, and also to hold that line of truth.
Thanks for being with us tonight, Belle. We're looking forward to hearing your analysis tonight. Let's head from London to Budapest. Let's meet our third correspondent. We can welcome Christina Than, Chief Correspondent in Hungary for Reuters, Deputy Bureau Chief for Central and Eastern Europe. Good evening to you, Christina. It is fantastic to have you with us as well. A busy week for you in the build-up to these elections. We're going to go into that in depth in a moment. Just explain to us in brief how your week is going so far.
Well, it's been one of the busiest weeks, I must say, in my career as a journalist. It's very exciting because for 16 years, this is the only election where we actually see a chance, or many Hungarians see a chance for a change in this country. I think we have still 2 very busy days ahead of us.
We will see.
With rallies and possibly events which we don't see at the moment. So there has been so much unexpected in this campaign, and this campaign has been so intensive that I can't remember any previous campaign being so intensive in my life as a journalist. And I've been working for Reuters for 27 years. So
it is something else, isn't it? Reports of assassination plans, allegations of false flag operations, denied categorically by the government. We'll get into some of that shortly. It is great to have you on board with us tonight too, Christina. Let's complete the lineup. Let's go to Jerusalem, bring in France 24 correspondent Noga Tonopolsky. Noga, it is always a pleasure when you're with us. I just want to ask you, you've been covering conflicts, plural. Have you had any time to look up this week, to watch the lunar mission? Has it brought any cheer to watch the crew of the Artemis II?
It has, seeing those 4 smiling faces floating in the air has really given me a few moments of perspective in a very, very heavy week here, filled, I would say, with uncertainty and a sort of dread, because the situation here doesn't seem to be leading anywhere that will make life any better for anybody in this region.
Well, you take us to events where we can start. Noga, it's great to have you with us as well tonight. Let's begin 8 minutes past midnight on Sunday morning. This is when President Trump's Truth Social announced, "We got him," confirming the rescue of the American weapons system officer missing behind enemy lines for 48 hours. The same 3 words used by President Obama 15 years ago at the capture of Osama bin Laden. It was the same SEAL Team 6 elite Marine unit as well at the centre of both operations. It would have been a vital propaganda win, a leverage point for Iran in negotiations if they found him first. Reports are that the officer scrambled up a 7,000-foot ridge while injured and found a crevice to hide in a rock face near Isfahan. A story made for Hollywood or Netflix, no doubt, one day. Reports in Bloomberg and the New York Times had suggested the downed fighter jet had knocked the confidence of the Trump administration, contrasting with the repeated rhetoric of overwhelming US dominance in the skies. By 6:30 Wednesday evening, another significant moment of breaking news broken on Truth Social by President Trump an hour and a half before his deadline of threatening to wipe out a civilization. He was calling it off. Almost all previous points of past contention between Iran and the US have been agreed on, he claimed, and subject to Iran immediately, completely opening the Strait of Hormuz, there would be a ceasefire. Nothing written down so far, no agreed starting point, no agreed boundaries, no way to know if stopping Israel's war in Lebanon was part of the truce talks. But Pete Hegseth spoke as if the war was over, and formal talks are set to start this weekend in Pakistan. And Bell True, from the threat to Iranian civilization to a wobbly ceasefire this week, it's not like we're surprised anymore by the mercurial nature of how this goes with the Trump administration. Trump supporters say this is the madman theory at work, that the appearance of irrationality to create credibility.
It's very hard to be able to understand what's really going on. And I've said repeatedly at this point, Donald Trump can actually contradict himself twice in just a single sentence. And it's almost a non-starter to begin trying to work out why he's doing certain things. But from what we can see is clearly there's a lot of global pressure on the US for these peace talks to go ahead. We've seen an unprecedented impact across the world because of this conflict. We've seen the worst disruptions to energy supplies, to supply chains in history. We've seen major transport hubs like Doha and Dubai airport closed. We've also seen massive bloodshed across the region, and there's potential for this to get so much worse if other countries in the Gulf are dragged in and forced to bomb Iran in response for the attacks on their own soil. Kuwait most recently just said they had a drone attack from Iran. So much is at stake. So it's hard to say what's going on in Donald Trump's mind. Even just following his social media account is bewildering. But certainly there's global pressure for something to come out of these talks. And it's really unclear to see where these talks are going to go, because both sides have such differing ideas of what a peace deal would look like and what a victory is.
It's interesting, I'm listening to Bell, pressure not just from other world leaders to get the Strait of Hormuz open, but pressure from the polls in the US. It's proving to be an unpopular war, not just with the public, but also within the MAGA base too. What are you hearing on intel from the American side?
Well, from the American side, you're hearing that the nation is fragmented, as we know about this administration. We're also hearing that there is a lot more pushback from Republicans, even from within the MAGA camp. After all, Donald Trump campaigned in 2024 on not taking America into any more forever wars. And quite frankly, because he's taking America into these negotiations this weekend in Pakistan with one of the weakest hands that he could possibly give them. It looks like Iran holds all the cards, and American military might is going to be ineffectual against Iran's ability to A, close the Strait of Hormuz and keep it closed, and B, use asymmetrical, as the word is, small bore, very low-tech weapons to defeat the high-tech military might of the U.S. They're doing it now. So I like to say something about the madman theory. That's gotten a lot of currency now, and it came out sort of post-Watergate. One of Richard Nixon's henchmen, Alexander Butterfield, wrote about it, talking about that Nixon could destabilize anybody he was negotiating with because they thought he'd just do anything. The problem with the madman theory, according to many commentators, is that it was developed by losers for losers. Nobody invokes the madman theory or uses those tactics when they're winning. It only happens when they're losing, and this is a last resort. And it only works if your opponent on the other side really believes that you'll do anything. And with Trump, I mean, the lesson of Trump number 2, of 2.0, his second term, is that Trump always chickens out. So to go into these negotiations with no cards, a record of backing out of whatever strong position you've taken, and absolutely no sense that what he's asking Iran to do, like give up its nuclear capabilities, is a non-starter for the Iranians. I don't have a lot of hope that it would be great if negotiations succeeded at this point. I don't have a lot of hope that it's going to go the way, certainly, that the Americans want them to go.
There are those, and President Trump talks about in his book, The Art of the Deal from the 80s, that it works in business. And, his administration will argue right now, they are presenting this as capital V for victory, says Pete Hegseth. And yet we are still very early stages. We don't know whether this is a continued ceasefire, what shape of ceasefire it is, and to what part Lebanon plays in that. Noga, Israel saying Lebanon was never part of the deal. That's according to Benjamin Netanyahu. Then Operation Eternal Darkness began. How do you read the correlation between the announcement of a ceasefire or announcement of attempts to talks for Benjamin Netanyahu and the US president's desire to make sure the Iran truce doesn't collapse?
Well, the most persuasive explanation I've seen so far of this chaos actually came from CBS News, who report that Donald Trump accepted the terms of a ceasefire over the entire Middle East, including Lebanon, then got a very intense phone call from Prime Minister Netanyahu, following which he backed off Lebanon. But meanwhile, both Pakistan as a mediating nation and Iran as the counterpart had been informed that Lebanon was a go. And that that is the source of what Vice President J.D. Vance called this misunderstanding. But there is a chance that with this massive, and terribly named Operation Eternal Darkness, really a cluelessly named military operation that killed more than 300 people in Lebanon, it's possible that Netanyahu has again miscalculated, thinking that it would bring him a measure of glory here in Israel, where he's really sinking in the polls, and that he had basically Donald Trump's thumbs up. But what we're hearing now here tonight and what we're seeing in evidence is that Israel has basically stopped striking in Beirut and is limiting itself very much to operations against Hezbollah launchers in southern Lebanon. So that de facto, I'm quoting now Gili Cohen, a colleague on Israeli Channel 11, de facto, Netanyahu has struck a deal with Trump whereby he has to give his personal okay to any operation in Beirut. That basically gives Donald Trump a veto over Israeli military operations in Beirut. And this is, again, a defeat in the popular imagination for Netanyahu, who has sold himself to Israelis for decades now as Mr. Security, Mr. Sovereignty, now being seen very much as a lower level wingman to Donald Trump.
It's very interesting. Belle, just listening to Noga, you've spent a lot of time reporting from Lebanon. This week, you reported, after speaking to witnesses, the wounded, a surgeon working at A&E in Beirut as well. Tell us about that.
Oh, it was pretty horrific, actually, speaking to people. I actually spoke to even one witness who was wounded and spoke to me from her hospital bed. But what we saw was an unprecedented attack on Lebanon, and that's, by Israel's own claims. On the ground, that meant absolutely devastating scenes for civilians. They said the explosions were like an earthquake and a ring of fire, and they were across very densely populated areas of Beirut, which are not affiliated with Hezbollah, also in the east of the country and in the south, and the death toll just kept rising. It was incredibly intense, talking about 100 targets in around 10 minutes alone, and a death toll of above 300, more than 1,000 injured. And that's what is really worrying for the people of Lebanon, because it's not even just the intensity of the strikes. They've got nowhere to hide. They don't have bomb shelters, but also the fact that the Israeli defense minister and parts of the Israeli government have made it clear that they want to keep Israeli troops within Lebanon and push even further into the country up into the Terni River, which is about 10% of the geographical area of Lebanon, which is a huge area of the country, a sovereign territory, and also an area which includes lots of places that have nothing to do with Hezbollah. So the concern for the people of Lebanon right now is this isn't a targeted attack on Hezbollah, that everyone is under threat, and that this will continue irrespective of what happens with these peace talks and in Islamabad, and that they are facing an incredibly bleak and bloody future.
And there is this kind of hope, to a lesser extent expectation, Anne, that we have this, we talked about unconventional paths towards a truce, towards something permanent. It's not Qatar, it's not in the UAE. These are areas that have all been affected in the Gulf, that often the mediators, as we've seen in Ukraine. This is in Pakistan, the Deputy Foreign Minister saying this weekend his country won't be the mediator, they'll be the facilitator. What are you making of that?
Well, it sounds to me, if you're parsing the words that carefully, it sounds to me like they're providing the room, but they're not directing the conversation. And that's probably a decent place to be if you're a third party to this mess. Quick fact check, I got my Nixon henchman wrong. It was H.R. Haldeman who proposed the madman theory, even more credible because Haldeman was known as the evil genius behind the Nixon presidency. But back to Pakistan and back to the talks. It's going to be very interesting to see what the U.S. thinks it can bring to these talks, if not a sense of reality, which does not pervade the way the U.S. views its both its proposals and its success in the Gulf. It's really pretty striking to see how the U.S. seems to think that. Hegseth talks about war fighters and military might and so forth. They completely ignore the fact that wars haven't been fought on military might for decades, possibly centuries. It's fought, on one piece of real estate here, and they're not bringing that.
But money talks for Iran, and if there's sanctions relief, anything to suggest a big win financially for a crippled economy. Remember that the protests started as a result of the crisis, and the economy turned against the regime. That surely plays in the US favour.
Absolutely, but on the other hand, Iran has another card to play. They're going to open the Strait of Hormuz and charge ships $2 million apiece to come through. That's a nice cash flow for a country that, yes, you're absolutely right, Gavin, really needs to rebuild an economy. What'll happen if this doesn't work, and if Iran doesn't somehow pull some kind of security out of this conflict, they're left with an economy that was already hollowed out, and they're going to need some kind of financial support to prop it up. The Strait of Hormuz might do it, but we'll have to see.
Belle, there is a piece this week in the New York Times, I don't know if you've managed to see it, but they reported this, quote, how Trump took the US to war in Iran, and their in-depth insight about the decision-making that went on into launching this war and Israel's role in it. February the 11th, in the Situation Room, it says, involved the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with the director of Mossad on board, on the line as well, insisting now was the perfect time for the regime to change, to bring an end to Islamic Republic, that Iran's ballistic missiles program will be destroyed in weeks. The Iranian regime would be too weak to close the Strait of Hormuz. The Islamic Republic could be destroyed, and it would be unlikely to unleash any blows against the US and neighbouring countries. So they predicted this, and the street protests would restart. US officials are said to have said this, that it was wrong, that the Ayatollah assassination was doable, and that the CIA director said Netanyahu's regime change scenario was farcical. Rubio apparently called it bullsh. You know the rest. I just wonder, this kind of places, according to the New York Times, the decision on Trump's instincts, that it was passed off to him to say, it worked in Venezuela, it's down to you. What do you make of that?
I mean, I think it's really, really telling, actually. I mean, let's just compare Venezuela very briefly to Iran. I mean, that wasn't even really about regime change, because effectively the rest of the regime just took up the reins. It was about a single individual, and it was a very different theatre. Obviously, with the situation in Iran, it was going to be much more complicated and regional. And I speak to Gulf diplomats fairly regularly to check in with them on what they think the situation is. I'm talking about from countries that have been directly under Iranian fire in retaliation for Israeli and US strikes. And the resounding message from them has been, surely the US knew that had a contingency plan for Iran's response, which was going to be attacking the Strait of Hormuz or firing at regional players, potentially at airports. This is not something that's been discovered in the last few weeks. Everyone knew that Iran had that toolbox and could use it, and that's been the issue in the past. And they are really confused at why the US went ahead with this without thinking about those consequences. And it's actually had an incredibly devastating impact on the world, and that's really what's allowed Iran to come out on top in this war, because even if they're losing the battle on their own territory, even if their military personnel infrastructure has been decimated, even if the supreme leader's been killed, they can once a week have a go at the Strait of Hormuz and impact global energy supplies. They can send a drone to an airport in Doha and Dubai and ground millions of people for an indefinite period of time. And this was known beforehand. So I think it's really interesting why that wasn't taken into account by the US. Was Donald Trump just very much, believing what Netanyahu said? Did he not really think that much about it? Clearly, this was a scenario that could happen and has happened, and people knew about it beforehand. And there's certainly a lot of anger in the Gulf over the fact that the US didn't put this in any contingency planning, apparently, and cared very little about what the impact would be.
Noga, listening to Belle, just explain the considerations to us for the Israeli administration. You touched upon it a moment ago. On the one hand, elections are coming up, as you said. President Trump is popular, isn't he, in Israel? And perhaps this tells us that Benjamin Netanyahu wouldn't want to push the president too far right now, given what we've just talked about. If the New York Times article is true as well, that they've pushed them so far, and it doesn't seem to have paid off if you're to read between the lines within the White House.
Well, right now it doesn't seem to have paid off for either Israel or the United States. Certainly, as Belle was saying, for the Gulf states, my understanding is that this is sort of a life-changing event, that the however this war ends up, their positioning in this region is going to be very significantly affected. And Israel may find itself in a similar situation. Prime Minister Netanyahu has a style of bluster and sometimes disregard for the truth that is a style that really does seem to dovetail with President Trump's tendencies towards, he likes to be flattered, he likes to be offered a grand gesture. And Netanyahu, as you said, is facing elections. Now, he has already made some efforts to delay the elections or to challenge the possibility, but under the law as it currently exists, he has to run elections by October 27th of this year. And it is entirely possible that he himself was persuaded, that he didn't mislead President Trump, but that he had persuaded himself, even if it was against the advice of some of his military advisors, that this was what he needed in order to again show himself as a kind of heroic leader to Israelis after the catastrophe, frankly, of the last 2.5 years. He was the man whose policies vis-a-vis Hamas explicitly made policies, led Israel to October 7th. Even though he's quashed any investigation in Israel, it's impossible to hide that fact. He's also on trial today, a day when, of course, a ceasefire is existing in Israel. People were thinking of sending their children back to schools. Netanyahu requested again to be absent from his trial for the next 2 weeks. So we see his priorities are trying to save his own political career, trying to delay a legal high noon, and yes, trying to keep Donald Trump on side, principally, as I understand it, because Netanyahu has no allies left. European leaders seem to be more or less done with him and his bluster. He has been indicted in the International Criminal Court, so he can no longer enjoy, these photo ops visiting foreign leaders. He's a bit of a caged tiger right now, and I think that is what we're seeing these days.
It is a point worth saying as well. We mentioned it, and Noga talked about it a short while ago. You mentioned it at the Strait of Hormuz, just the figures from the UN's International Maritime Organization, the IMO, on what's going on. There's been 130 tankers passing the strait daily before the conflict began. Since the ceasefire agreement, the figure now around 5 or 6 a day, sometimes nothing. That's according to the IMO. Iran, you talked about the significant leverage at these talks in Pakistan. Let me ask you, Anne, after the protests about the economy in Iran, the regime change calls, conflict in the space of 4 months, what do you think ordinary Iranians either gained or lost from this war?
I wish I had good sources on the ground in Iran. I know some of the journalists who are on the panel tonight probably certainly have much better sources than I do. Just anecdotally, what I hear, and from journalists here who have been to Iran, is that the situation on the ground is both devastating physically, with destruction and fear and interrupted utilities and decimated schools and decimated families. The situation on the ground is horrible. But what a lot of people talk about is that the will of the Iranians to eventually determine their own destiny is unbowed. And so what's always very, very disheartening about any war is that it seems to be made not for the good of the people, but for the good of the warmongers. And that certainly seems to be the case here. When you listen to even the Iranian leaders talk about what they're thinking about as this unfolds, you're certainly hearing it from the Americans. You're never hearing about how much better it's going to be for the Iranians that all of this has happened.
Christina, let's bring you in. I wonder how much, if at all, the Iran war has featured as a dominant issue for either of the parties, the two main candidates in Hungary ahead of elections. I saw your piece for Reuters. You had vox pops of a man on the street who said He didn't want it to stay out of the war. As long quoted as Viktor Orban's our Prime Minister, he said we can be sure to stay out of this horror. I'm not sure if he was referring to Ukraine or Iran or both. But are you coming across that feeling a lot, or concerns of Orban's power, the desire for change, and where the Iran war is a factor, if at all?
Well, I think it's more like the war in Ukraine, which is a factor. So Iran is too far away simply from Hungary, and the only impact which is felt, or which was felt prior to the government decision to impose a price cap on fuel, was rising fuel prices. But price caps have been a favorite tool for Viktor Orban's government, and they imposed a price cap. So Hungarians are basically protected, so to say, from the Middle East impact. As for the war in Ukraine, that's more of an immediate concern for many Hungarians, many voters, because it's simply next door. We share a border. We still remember the time when we had Ukrainian refugees flooding over to Hungary. Most of them went on to Western Europe. So Viktor Orban and his party, they have cast this election as a choice for Hungarians. They should choose between war and peace. And the government has accused the opposition of dragging Hungary into this war next door, which obviously the opposition has denied. So the war has featured very high.
So presenting it as an existential issue for Hungary, let's move then to Budapest. Let's talk about what's happening where you are. This is the most hotly fought election in a generation. It's been framed, as you referred to, Christina, right at the start. It's been making many headlines, from security alert at the start of the week, alleged by opposition figures to be a false flag operation to boost Viktor Orban's chances, categorically denied by the government as opposition panic mongering. There have been phone leaks suggesting unusually close diplomatic coordination between the foreign ministers of Hungary and Russia. Normal diplomacy, said Budapest. We've seen in-person endorsements from the Trump administration too, who had a message for Brussels.
This is unprecedented. It's unprecedented for an American vice president to come the week before an election. The reason why we're doing it is because we thought there was so much garbage happening against Viktor in this election that we had to show that there are actually a lot of people and a lot of friends across the world who recognize that Viktor and his government are doing a good job and they're important partners for peace.
As we're on air, there's a rally going on for the opposition leader, Peter Magyar. There's also a 7-hour mass concert underway in Hero Square in the capital. Thousands are gathering, organised by a group of artists and activists, framing it as, quote, cultural resistance to the Orban regime. The Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, the longest-serving leader in Europe, claims events like this are grassroots, influenced by opposition networks and EU or Ukraine-aligned actors. But it is his biggest challenge yet. The candidate, who used to work for him in the Prime Minister's office, Peter Magyar, formed his opposition movement TISA 2 years ago. He's been relying less on TV exposure, more on travelling the country, capturing his popularity on social media, arguing Orban has built a deeply entrenched system of power and weakening the country politically, economically, serving only the elite. Orban claims Magyar is a Brussels-backed pro-war politician. Back to you, Christina. Your headline this week, profound in capturing the moment. You say Hungary's election could end the Orban era and reshape its place in Europe. Tell us what you mean.
Well, I think this is the pivotal question for many Hungarians, also in my generation and the young generation as well. What this means is essentially that Viktor Orban's government has earned a bad reputation within the EU for its conflicts on many areas with Brussels and other fellow states. We have seen conflicts over migration policy or certain taxes imposed by this government. More recently, we had Orban's government blocking a loan to Ukraine, which had been agreed in December. So basically, Orban has become kind of a thorn in the side for many people, many countries, many leaders in the EU. So many observers say, analysts say that a change in the government would bring a bit smoother relations with the EU. They are not saying that it will bring a sea change, so it's not going to mean that suddenly a government potentially led by Peter Magyar is going to agree to everything and not block anything. It's just a more constructive dialogue, which many people say could result from a change in government. But it's still 2 days to go, so we will see how the final day shapes up, and there is still uncertainty over the outcome. So even though polls suggest that the opposition party has a significant lead nationally, Orbán's Fidesz party has a strong support in the countryside. So we shall see how the countryside decides.
Well, I see reports suggesting 24% are still undecided, so there's still a big unknown about it. I also want to ask you about, I remember there was a big campaign back in 2022 for the previous election. There was an AI-generated Fidesz video. It was a little girl asking her mother when her dad was coming home before the scene cut to an execution on the battlefields of Ukraine. And Bell talked earlier about the use of AI. We saw a Fidesz slogan after that. It said, "Safe choice." I just wonder what you're seeing this time in terms of AI, in terms of how aggressive the campaign has become.
Well, this film was actually in this campaign. So this was one of the AI-generated films or videos which made a splash. So that was discussed widely in local media and everywhere, and we also ran a story about that. So AI-generated content. This was the first campaign when AI-generated content featured quite frequently, and actually this is very disturbing for many voters who cannot differentiate between real stuff and AI-generated content. So social media has become a very important battleground in this campaign. And in this field, observers say Peter Magyar actually has managed to have an advantage over Orbán's campaign. So Fidesz has been struggling in the digital campaign field.
And that's about barnstorming. That's about Peter Magyar going from town to town across the country, Facebook Lives, direct addresses. I see reports that he's been going around hospitals with thermometers because the AC hasn't been working, showing how hot it is, actually getting to conditions, getting to the economy. And I guess that's at the heart of a lot of people's vote, where their pocket is and how much money's in it.
Yes. We in Hungary, we have seen 3 years of economic stagnation, which came after an inflation shock, which actually took inflation to 25% in annual terms, and we have come down from there. But the food price inflation, that hurt many Hungarians. So the inflation shock still has some impacts, and cost of living is a problem for many Hungarians. So the economy is a central topic, and also public services, the state of healthcare, state of education, hospitals. That's also a topic which many Hungarians discuss these days.
And just listening to Christina, a brief thought from you, because you have the US and the EU sitting in opposing corners here. You have the US quite vocally, Washington, as we saw with JD Vance, Brussels whispering in the corners. There's no European leader officially backing the Magyar campaign. And he's an unknown entity, perhaps, as well. It's worth saying he's a centre-right candidate. He worked with Viktor Orbán. Sure. He doesn't talk about immigration. He rarely talks about the Ukraine war. He wants stability. He talks more about corruption.
Well, I understand that's a big issue, and I would love to ask Christina a question when we're finished with this very briefly. I understand corruption is the big issue, that Hungarians are tired of the corruption. They're tired of seeing Orbán enriching his friends at the expense of ordinary Hungarians. And I've also read, and this is the question I'd like to ask, I've read that JD Vance coming to prop up the Orbán campaign might backfire, because either the Hungarians aren't going to listen to anything that JD Vance says to them, or the message that he's carrying is simply going to fall on deaf ears. So I wonder how it's being received in Hungary.
Christina, we've got 20 seconds before the end of the programme. What's your thought on that?
Well, we haven't seen any polls recently about Hungarians' perceptions of the US, but I think he came in the last stretch of the campaign. And to be honest, I think this visit probably did not have any significant impact on the thoughts most Hungarians have right now, or on the stance they have.
Thank you, Christina. You did that in 18 seconds. That's incredible. Thank you to all of my excellent panel tonight. In London, thank you to Belle True, the chief foreign correspondent for the Independent newspaper. Thank you, Belle. In Budapest, we've been joined by Christina Than, chief correspondent in Hungary for Reuters, deputy bureau chief for Central and Eastern Europe. Thank you, Christina. In Jerusalem, thank you to France 24's correspondent Noga Tonopolsky. Noga, thank you. And at ground control, alongside me in the studio, thank you, Anne Bagamarie, independent journalist consultant. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching and listening on the podcast. We will leave you with some footage of the Artemis crew sent to Earth, of their MRE packs, meals ready to eat. It turns out you can eat prawn cocktails in space, but you do still have to eat your greens. Bon appetit. We'll see you in 7 days for the world next week.
Cocktail. And this has been rehydrated already, so we added water to it, and the shrimp soaked back up the water, and it's actually pretty tasty. This is an example of a food that has not been rehydrated yet. It got all dried out for flying up here in space, and those are green beans. So we do have to eat our vegetables even in space, but don't worry, they do give us mac and cheese.